Yes, what's going on, CaiLifers? My name's Kai, and I'm back with another performance test video, this time for the Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered on the ROG Ally X. Now let's see if this legendary game can still conquer almost 20 years later. We're going to be looking at how this game performs without any AFMF2 or lossless scaling providing frame gen, and then we're going to look at to see how those pieces of software boost performance in this legendary game. So for the uninitiated then, before Skyrim, there was Oblivion, released in 2006 by Bethesda. You were the hero of prophecy, but also free to just steal cheese wheels and join the Dark Brotherhood or punch crabs with no context. And thanks to the community, the remastered version gives this aging gem a really good, strong visual upgrade worthy of current hardware. And that's what the ROG Ally X is. So listen, we're starting this test then in 1080p, no AFMF2 running, no lossless scaling, and we've got all the graphics settings set to that low preset because we're going to try and squeeze as many frames as we can out of this thing at the highest resolution that the Ally X can provide. We've also got frame gen within the game itself disabled because we want to see just how smoothly this thing can run. We've got the FPS counter in the top left-hand corner of the screen. Keep an eye on that big number because that's giving you a live visual representation of how many frames we're squeezing out of this thing. Okay, so here we are then, 1080p, no frame gen running, and that graphics preset on low. And as you can see, we're squeezing out around 30 frames per second. We generally sit between 30 and 35 FPS then on this graphics setting. It is perfectly playable, and I'm pleased to say that there aren't really any big drops or judders in the gameplay here. So even though we're only at around 30 to 35 FPS, it's still perfectly playable. Not ideal. We all kind of look for that sort of magical 60 FPS and above mark, but you're gonna have to wait until we drop the graphics settings and introduce frame gen to make that happen. Hey, there's one of those crabs I was talking about, but I'd managed to kill it with a sword rather than punch it. This game, by the way, looks absolutely beautiful, and one thing that I always say when I'm doing these performance tests is don't be wary of dropping the resolution, because even when you drop from 1080p to 900p, as we're about to do here, and even then down to 720p, because the Ally X's screen is that small, you really don't notice a huge drop in resolution and so graphical fidelity. Not so, obviously, if you have this docked. If you have this docked and you drop the resolution, it will start to look a little bit ugly. But as you can see here, then, that drop from 1080p all the way down to 720p has given us a really solid boost in frame rate now. We're sitting at between 45 and 50 frames on average. It feels really smooth. It still looks really nice to my eye, even though we've got the graphic settings then down on low still. And like I say, that's mostly down to the fact that this still looks great on the Ally X's small screen and obviously the variable refresh rate. Now let's just fill in the gap then. We're going to up from 720p to 900p, and as you'd expect then we get fewer frames than we did on 720p, but we get more frames than when we're at 1080. So we're still sitting above the 40 mark, sort of between 40 and 45 FPS. And this is a nice halfway house. I think, in all honesty, if you're going to run this game without any sort of frame gen, then you're better off just running this at 720p. And if you want, you can up the graphics settings from low to medium or high and enjoy a slightly better looking game. But obviously, the ideal here is to have as smooth a game as possible. And I don't think really running around at 30 FPS, even if the game looks nicer, 1080p is the most ideal way to play this game. Okay, so now we're going to introduce lossless scaling. Now, lossless scaling has had a recent update, which has introduced adaptive scaling. But we're not going to use that. We're going to start with fixed and do our ×2 frame gen. Still got here the graphics settings on low. We're back at 1080p because obviously I want the highest resolution that I can get along with this frame gen. And as you can see, we have a considerable boost to our frame rate. Now, the usual caveats apply with lossless scaling, and I'm a big fan of lossless scaling, and I would absolutely use it with Oblivion Remastered because of the type of game that it is. But have a look at the input lag here. You can see that's fairly pronounced input lag. It's not game breaking by any means. It just means a little bit of anticipation, but this is something that is introduced when you're using the lossless scaling app. So the trade-off is, or rather the deal you get is a massive jump in frame rate. The trade-off you get is some slight input lag, and you also get this kind of ghosting effect. So you see the ghosting around the sword. Anytime I do sort of a rotation test and I spin round, you'll see that there's some ghosting, and that's obviously from where the game is having to generate the extra frames that just aren't there. I still think it's absolutely superb tech, and like I say, in a competitive game, in a competitive shooter, in a racer, I would not want to use lossless scaling. In fact, I'd probably want to avoid frame gen at all costs. But I think in a game like this, it's still perfectly playable. So I thought I'd test whacking the graphics settings up to high and seeing how much of a hit to the frame rate it takes. And well, the answer is this is still pretty damn smooth. Obviously, we have a big drop in your frame rate once we drop from low to high, and look at the pronounced ghosting now that's happening around the sword. So this now does become a matter of taste and whether or not you can put up with the pronounced ghosting that happens, because obviously now we've whacked the settings back up to high, we're going to drop the native frame rate. So there's even more frame gen that has to happen through lossless scaling. Now, we're going to try the adaptive setting, this new update, this adaptive setting, lossless scaling. Ignore the first few seconds, because I think this is just essentially buffering. And as you can see, and that's not a lie, in the top left-hand corner, we're at now 120 FPS. But look at this ghosting and this almost like swimming pool underwater effect. Again, have a look at the input lag. It's about the same as when we were on fixed, but the drawbacks of lossless scaling are more pronounced in this adaptive mode. Now, these frames are genuine and it feels extremely smooth to play, but it also does feel like you're playing underwater a little bit. So when there's any kind of pronounced movement on the screen, characters moving around, camera moving around, you will get this ghosting swimming pool underwater liquid effect. And again, it's a matter of taste. You might enjoy this rather significant frame boost that you get from the adaptive setting in lossless scaling. For me, it's a bit too much. And if I'm going to use lossless scaling, I'm going to keep it fixed at that ×2 frame generation, which we're going to switch back to. Here. So we're back to that fixed setting, and as you can see, even though we drop the frames again, you can see that that kind of swimming pool effect is gone. So that ghosting still exists, but it's much more playable. It's much more playable, and remember, these graphics settings are on high. So let's switch it now. We're going to try this with AFMF2 on. So lossless scaling will be off, and we're going to turn the ROG Ally X frame gen on. So that's AFMF2, the fluid motion frames 2. And still with the graphics settings on high, and let me tell you, this is also good performance. We don't get the same kind of frame generation gains that you get from lossless scaling, but again, this is perfectly playable. We're not hitting 60 FPS, but this game is definitely better with AFMF2 enabled. Right, that'll do it for another performance test video. Thanks again for joining me over here on CaiLife. Listen, hit like if you're a long-time Elder Scrolls fan, and let me know in the comments, what's that one quest or moment from Oblivion that you'll never forget? And if you want more retro modern performance tests, you know what to do. Subscribe, and I'll see you in Tamriel.